What if every single Jujutsu Kaisen character that participated in the Culling game was swapped into a different colony entirely? In this video, I'm gonna take every fight that occurs in this particular arc in Jujutsu Kaisen and flip every participant to see if some of these students got lucky with their opponents, or if some of them would still be able to pull a victory out against sometimes an even worse matchup. If that sounds interesting to you, hit that like button, subscribe, and enjoy the entire Culling game reversed.
What would the outcome of Tokyo Colony number 1 have been if Itadori and Megumi ended up taking completely different paths? The way that both Yuji and Megumi were set up to place their trust in the first friendly person they met, they could have easily ended up in entirely opposite situations. With the teleportation of the Culling game entrance being purely random, what if all the battles we've seen so far completely switched up, and all the roles were swapped? This is the Culling game reversed. Fushiguro Megumi versus Higuruma Hiromi. So, in the original timeline, after defeating both the sorcerers that attempted to pick him off as he entered the fray, Yuji met up with Rinamai and was able to discover Higuruma's location at the theater through their previous relationship. For the sake of time, we'll skip ahead and just say after taking out a player or two on his way over, Megumi would eventually stumble upon the theater that Higuruma was holed up in. Not really exerting much of his energy to get to this point, Fushiguro would be well at 100% before walking into the main auditorium where he'd interrupt Higuruma's bath same as Yuji did. And right away, the interaction the two share would veer in a completely different direction. Originally, Yuji's more confident, inquisitive nature drives him to immediately question Higuruma's intentions when taking a full suited bath, while Megumi tends to remain more reserved and keeps his thoughts to himself. Deducing that his target was definitely up to something weird, Higuruma would have to question Megumi's arrival before the quiet teen even said a word to him. On Fushiguro's original route, the demeanor he holds in the Culling game is vastly different from how he holds himself normally. Much more ruthless, and taking on a much more hands-on approach in terms of making actions first and asking questions later. Megumi's intention with any of the Culling game players he faces certainly isn't to befriend them. Probably going to be coming off as hostile from the very start. Higuruma isn't going to be as open and talkative as he was to Yuji, purely from Megumi's standoffish nature. When questioned on who he was, Megumi most likely wouldn't even dignify Higuruma with a response, instead answering his question with basically his own question. Are you Higuruma Hiromi? The lawyer, currently in a midlife crisis, only amplified by the growing chaos of the Culling game, and just only recently awakening to his sorcerer powers, Higuruma would probably keep up his playful persona for the first encounter, before recognizing that Fushiguro has murderous intent. With the conversation getting nowhere, Fushiguro being too aggressive in his interrogation, and Higuruma, a man of law and debate, not giving a single inch to hang himself with, seeing no other choice, Megumi would probably take in enough context clues to figure out this was his target. And if not, well, as we saw in his original timeline, he's not exactly afraid to gain points the old-fashioned way. To close the distance, Nue would be the perfect long-range Shikigami to spring forth and launch itself directly into the bathtub. Coating itself in electric shock, the last place Higuruma would have wanted to be for this attack would have been in water. Even if Higuruma was able to react, the electric shock on his wet clothes do not bode well. Being able to take a full wallop from Yuji Itadori to the solar plexus, Higuruma would be more than likely able to survive a direct hit from charged up Nue. Steadying himself and summoning his own Shikigami and gavel, Fushiguro would watch his opponent closely, waiting for a move in order to properly counter. However, by doing exactly this, Megumi's calculating mind is truly what would fail him in this battle, as although he doesn't know it yet, this is his best possible opportunity to land a win condition. If Megumi had just begun an onslaught with more Shikigami, or even just continued attacking with Nue to keep Higuruma on the defensive, he could have avoided a large amount of this confrontation. Alas, as character traits are, Megumi's carefulness is a flaw just as much as it is a positive. Waiting long enough for Higuruma to gather up cursed energy and get within range, the lawyer would waste no time. Similar to his battle with Itadori, calling upon his domain expansion. Shocked, the innate barrier would instantly take form around Fushiguro, and with only one split second to make a decision, he can either be taken victim of deadly sentencing right from the start, or, if able to react quick enough, it may actually be possible for Fushiguro to respond with his own domain, even if just enough time to delay the barrier's completion and nullify the innate ability. In this specific scenario, Now caught in a tug of war with Higuruma's territory, the two sorcerers would be locked in a battle of will. With both Fushiguro and Higuruma having only unlocked their domains a short while ago, neither one of them can give credence to the handicap of experience to win this fight either. As their domains clash, the real question would be if the both of them are unable to move. In the territory war with Dagon, it took every ounce of Fushiguro's strength and effort to hold back Dagon's sure hit effect from taking over the small patch of domain Megumi was able to muster. And without the Zenkai boost in cursed energy due to his strenuous struggle he was in with Reggie's gang and even Reggie himself eventually, it's doubtful he has yet reached a level we see in his original timeline fight. Higuruma, only having awoken his sorcerer powers for about a week or so now, wouldn't be much better off either. Although his main technique revolves completely around the domain, and most of his power is drawn directly from that as a base, his understanding is primitive, and this would be the first time he's ever been faced with a sorcerer capable to match him on this front. Higuruma would definitely be taken aback, but would most likely adapt quickly. Now in a completely neutral setting, resigned to just both their own combat ability, the two of them would engage in a physical fight while their cursed techniques were disabled. Having to juggle cursed energy manipulation in order to properly struggle, as well as reinforce one's domain not to lose in the tug of war, both Megumi and Higuruma would be pressing themselves to their limit in order to actually gain any ground in this fight. Megumi having access to his weapons, and Higuruma his shape-shifting gavel. As the two of them engage, Higuruma may be the one to find himself with an advantage in this situation. Although normally able to masterly integrate his hand-to-hand combat with his shadows, with all supernatural focus directed to keeping his domain in check, Megumi would only be able to rely on pure skill. And to be up against a sorcerer that was even able to put Itadori Yuji on the back foot, Higuruma would be able to find an opening on Megumi sooner than later. If any ground is lost in the territory struggle, literally any at all, Higuruma's sure hit effect has the chance to activate and instantly kill any momentum in Megumi's favor, shifting it over into Higuruma's direction. Powerless to stop the trial once it actually takes effect, both Megumi and Higuruma would be separated from their close quarters battle and return to the podiums. With Higuruma fully aware of any evidence that Megumi is placed on trial for, he almost always assumes the position of power in his domain. Although having a much more logical background than Itadori, if Fushiguro is found guilty at any point in the trial, confiscation is inevitable. And with the removal of Fushiguro's curse technique also comes the erasure of any chances he has of winning. Without the 10 shadows, Fushiguro Megumi is a grade 2 sorcerer at best. Although his hand-to-hand has grown significantly over the course of the series, his greatest asset is his ability to merge his shadows and Shikigami into his fighting style flawlessly. In his original timeline battle against Reggie Star, Megumi is able to utilize his multiple different options to take advantage of any situation he's pulled into. His technique at this point is an extension of his own self, becoming one and the same with him, much to his benefit, as the potential of the 10 shadows truly is endless when it comes to versatility. If you were to take that all off the table, Fushiguro doesn't have much left to stand up against Higuruma. Despite being a practicing lawyer, the newly awakened sorcerer was able to expertly wield his shape-shifting gavel against the close quarters master Itadori, barely leaving the battle with so much as a scratch, and finding multiple different ways to manipulate his weapon and catch Yuji off guard or keep him up against the wall. Even when it came down to the final moments of the battle between Itadori and Higuruma in the original timeline, the only reason the latter actually lost was because he himself gave up, not being able to bring himself to take an innocent man's life. Would we consider Fushiguro an innocent man? Has he really committed no crime-worthy offense? Is the allowing of Sukuna's vessel to walk amongst the living every waking day not a violation of the social contract itself? A man that saves people selfishly, deeming who is worthy simply off of his own merit and feelings. Is that someone who really deserves to make decisions for the grand at large? Unseal Satoru Gojo from Prison Realm? End the Culling game? Save your sister? Such selfish desires. Having absolutely no reason to find the same sympathy in Megumi that Higuruma finds in Yuji. Much like the other players who make up Higuruma's point count, Megumi is merely another human attempting to abuse the system that he must judge accordingly. And his Shikigami Judge Man, now the only Shikigami remaining in battle, will allow him to do just that. Even if Megumi is somehow able to discover the idea of the retrial, being returned to the podium him for yet another chance, Fushiguro can potentially clear his name and return his cursed technique. Although unlikely, we cannot completely rule this out as an option. However, despite that actually being an outcome, what really comes after that? Is Higuruma not able to immediately relaunch his domain expansion and start a new trial? Would Megumi be able to find a win condition if he does get his cursed technique back? Playing devil's advocate, of course, another option would be Megumi is found guilty a second time, resulting in not only confiscation of cursed technique, but the death penalty. And with the summoning of Executioner's Sword and still no 10 shadows for Megumi, it's safe to say this would be lights out for Fushiguro on this branching path. Megumi's main issue with going out this way would be his inability to use his trump card. In most what-if cases, Fushiguro always has Maharaga as a way to equalize the playing field. While it may not be a win, this does put most other players in the series in checkmate. With his curse technique fully removed, Fushiguro would be silenced by Higuruma without a trace. Now, how do you feel about this entire possibility? Let me know in the comments below. I think Higuruma is definitely a hard counter for someone like Fushiguro, whose power level relies so heavily on his curse technique. Being someone that has a solid physical presence that is able to contend with the likes of Yuji Itadori, this puts Higuruma a higher class than Megumi, at least on the physical front. And if most of the fight would be fought on neutral playing field, or Higuruma's home territory in his domain, Fushiguro would be the one lacking in my opinion. But the child has surprised me before. Welcome back to the Culling Games Reversed, the series where we take the current arc of Jujutsu Kaisen and switch the roles of certain characters to get different outcomes. Fresh off the chilling defeat of Fushiguro Megumi at the hands of Higuruma Hiromi, the newly awakened Grade 1 sorcerer of the modern era, Tokyo Colony 1 would have already lost all hope of achieving enough points for a rule edition. But before even being able to discover this information, picking up where the initial timeline divergence left off, with Megumi taking his pathway to Higuruma, Yuji, in this perspective, would have fallen for the honeypot trap in Remy. Compared to Megumi, an initially hostile and hard to get along with individual, he saw no qualms picking a fight with a sorcerer like Remy regardless of gender. The gullible Itadori unable to sense any sinister underlying motives, he would end up at Reggie's headquarters faster than it would take Kenjaku to fold the entire White House safety squad. When first meeting Reggie Star, Yuji, as mentioned before, has a much more social, inviting personality than Megumi. Although here on business, Itadori isn't afraid to take people at face value when they claim to be friendly. Even in the original timeline, when first meeting the comedian Takaba, they instantly bond in quick fashion over their supposed relationships with Fushiguro. Reggie would attempt to negotiate with Yuji, who after some amount of dialogue would be able to parse out that Reggie wasn't exactly that great of a person. He just comes out right and says he would have taken Megumi out if he didn't come off as strong enough. So I doubt he wouldn't be so coy with Yuji either. Instead of outright threatening Reggie for his group's points, Itadori would more likely opt to leave out the back door and not join the suspiciously evil crime squad thing they've got going on. His prime motivation would be to find Higuruma, and now that he was duped by Remy, he's further from his target than he was before, and he's lost a lot of time. Of course, the series of Jujutsu Kaisen never wanting to miss an opportunity for a group jumping would cause Reggie to refuse to allow the vessel to just run away and not give up his 5 points to their cause. As the negotiations again break down, the door behind Yuji would bust open, revealing the sorcerer Chizuru Hari, the same attacker that pounced on Megumi when civil discussion ended in the original timeline. However, in a close quarters environment like this, unlike Fushiguro, Itadori thrives. Without a doubt, able to not only dismantle Chizuru like a box of napkins upon first contact, Yuji has the instincts to react quick enough. And we've seen the kind of damage he's capable of when going up against the fodder sorcerers in his original timeline. He can definitely incapacitate Chizuru with one solid punch or a ground pound. Undeniably impressed, Reggie's interest would be piqued. Now knowing it's going to be an all-out brawl, Itadori would attempt to either escape the building or start attacking Reggie. But it seems more beneficial for Reggie on his own decision tree to use a similar tactic like he did against Megumi, contractually recreating gasoline to douse Yuji in, while Hazanoki Iori sneak attacks with his explosive body parts from above. However, the one thing both Reggie and Hazanoki wouldn't be able to count on would be Yuji's intense durability. Without a doubt able to tank the explosions from Hazanoki's curse technique with minimal, if any, damage. While the gasoline does pose extra concern, debris can be used to defend against the attacks as shown when Megumi committed the same act. In these critical moments where Remy may try to attack Yuji when the two are separated from the rest of the gang, the more understanding and empathetic Itadori would find a hard time simply disregarding the girl's life like Megumi does. Despite betraying him, when she calls out and screams for him to say he'll protect her no matter what, Yuji, more of the play the hero type character than Megumi ever will be, would scoop Remy up into his arms and defend. Of course, ensuring that she plans not to attack or hurt him while he's defending her from Reggie. Yuji isn't stupid enough to leave her alive and kicking if she's actively a threat though. Keep that in mind. If she does turn on him or he gets the feeling she's tricking him again, there's no doubt he folds her like an ostrich that's taking the day off. For the sake of the video, we'll say that with Yuji's declaration of keeping her safe, she decides not to fuck him over. For now. Personally, I think the main difference in the small group scuffle that Itadori will have is that more of the initial fight will be taking place inside the building. With Megumi's aerial capability, thanks to Nue, he's more likely to take the battle outside. And without another body to keep safe, he can lash out. Most of the chase would involve Hazanoki and Reggie using their curse techniques for attack at a distance and weed out Yuji and the traitor Remy. Hazanoki's explosions and Reggie's ability to conjure small projectiles or even large vehicles. All of these things which can be given simple commands as if they were Shikigami, like fly forward or spin upwards, all make for significantly destructive abilities. While Yuji outspeeds the two of them, having to protect Remy and deal with area of effect attacks puts him at a disadvantage. Although Itadori is strong enough to use all the created debris as defense, or even by imbuing certain objects with his cursed energy, he can use pieces of buildings, tables, and even doors as weapons to counter with. Throughout this whole scenario, Itadori remains at a disadvantage and doesn't stand much of a chance of getting close and personal when he's faced with two assailants. He would have no choice but to bring the battle outside, just like his partner Megumi did, if he doesn't get blown up and sent flying out of the building by one of Reggie or Hazanoki's attacks anyway. Luckily for him, this is where Itadori would gain a new ally, with the arrival of the comedian Takaba, who, with all the noise and destruction caused from the group battle taking place inside the building, would definitely come to check out the party. Hazanoki would be taken off of Yuji's hands and allow Yuji to focus solely on the main ringleader Reggie Star. Basically both having one half of a brain cell each that becomes one whole when together. I have no doubts in my mind they'd be able to get along instantly and be willing to fight for each other. At this point though, with the defeat of Megumi, no rule change would be added to the Culling game yet, meaning that there is still no way to exchange points between players. Yuji needs to take care of this battle quickly and try to find either Megumi or Higuruma. As Reggie squares up, Yuji puts on his serious face. In the original timeline, the 10 Shadows curse technique offers Megumi a massive amount of versatility in his own fight against Reggie Star. Going against a character that can summon random objects with varying levels of severity, going so far as even being able to completely heal himself with a portable spa trip. The main problem Yuji faces is time. The longer the battle goes on for, and the more time that Reggie can bide, the worse Itadori's chances become. Primarily only being able to rely on his close quarters damage, while massively reliable in getting the win. If Reggie can squirm his way out of every trap Yuji sets up, there's no guarantee he can land a critical enough hit. Although previously mentioned to be able to launch cursed infused projectiles like debris at Reggie from afar, and still maintaining a much higher speed stat than the reincarnated sorcerer, Reggie can still set up a myriad of situations that net him a win condition himself. Some of the things Reggie's shown himself capable of conjuring consist of 1. A rope net that can tangle Yuji and make him completely immobile. 2. A horde of flying knives that make it very hard to dodge depending on how well they're aimed or how sneakily used. And among other miscellaneous things, 3. Fucking multiple Mack trucks. And then he's got flower pots, daikon, a fucking 2-story house, and just way more shit I have to imagine. Reggie has plenty of possibilities at his fingertips. Even though we've seen Itadori take an entire car and fling it, it's not so much a matter of one of these things just being the end-all be-all. It's the fact that any number of these things can be manifested at one time and given different commands. The house can be told to do the tango if Reggie sees fit. And while Yuji's trying to stay on tempo and dodge, he catches a curling iron to the b-hole that was commanded to lie in wait for the perfect 1,000 years of pain moment. Reggie has a very high battle IQ and is able to use that to his advantage when facing a character like Yuji, who, frankly, is a one-trick pony. Like a base character in a fighting game, with a strong grasp of everything, you can be undeniably powerful, but characters with tricky abilities can trip you up when you have nothing tricky yourself to back it up. All that being said, I definitely think with the advanced durability we've seen Yuji exercise, he's also leveled his cursed energy manipulation up enough to achieve massive results in the defensive department. Comparable to, I would even say, like we've seen in the battle against the 2 fodder sorcerers in his original timeline, Three Finger Sukuna, just based off the acrobatics we've seen. Smashing people through buildings, stopping powerful ultimate attacks with his bare fist. When he fights Higuruma, he's also shown a massive increase in his own battle intelligence, figuring out how to pull a retrial out of Higuruma's domain expansion and pull himself out of the uncomfortable position he found himself in. And to be fair, it only takes one good Black Flash to put a character like Reggie, a sorcerer fit neatly on the modern grade 1 scale at best, out for his afternoon nap. With the real struggle of this battle being Itadori's beeline to Reggie, maneuvering through all the obstacles that he puts in his way. Whether those distractions be simple knives to a horde of heat-seeking 64-wheelers, Itadori has the speed to dodge every single one of them that is thrown at him. He also has the power to take an entire car and toss it back at Reggie, or the quick wit to catch one of those knives and use them as a weapon to block other incoming projectiles. While Yuji does need to watch out for delayed commands, such as Reggie throwing a knife but not giving it a command until Yuji takes it into his possession, the amount of damage that can actually come from something like this is minimal at best. Compared to Megumi, the kind of beating that Sukuna's vessel can take is a significant difference. Like a berserker pursuing his prey, Yuji would eventually find his finishing blow. With people like Remy and Hazanoki out of the equation, he can definitely find that mark. If the distractions become too much, such as a situation where Takaba doesn't come to help and leaves the battle a 2-on-1, Itadori may not be so lucky. Despite being able to eat up a lot of damage, under constant pressure, Itadori isn't exactly a miracle worker without an ally to work off of. If he has to defend Remy, he wouldn't be able to focus primarily on the battle and would have to choose to escape or lose. Or if Remy turned on him in a critical moment, she either gets, boom, turned to dust, or she betrays him at a perfect moment where he loses the battle. There are even possibilities where, as stated before, if Yuji takes too long and Reggie's able to stack up enough momentum to actually knock Itadori off balance, the win conditions can begin to pile on. However, all of these differing paths border on the line of fiction. Arcog, a machination that exists to eliminate all cursed spirits and fight for his friends, wouldn't allow any other outcome but victory. Itadori needs to defeat these ruffians and find Higuruma to help his friend Megumi save his sister. And after finally defeating Reggie and his gang, he, Takaba, and Remy would make their way to the theater. Upon entering, they would immediately realize Megumi has been defeated. Welcome back to the Culling Games Reversed, the series where we take the battle royale between Jujutsu sorcerers and watch events unfold with completely different outcomes. Our last focus surrounded Tokyo Colony 1, where Itadori Yuji easily cleared Reggie Star and his gang, recruiting both Remy and Takaba on the way. Megumi, on the other hand, met defeat at Higuruma's hands. Our current focus surrounds both Hakari Kinji and Yuta Okkotsu switching roles, both key members of the protagonist antagonist team, their respective victories mark great progress. Had the plan been instead for Okkotsu to accompany Panda to Tokyo Colony 2 on the hunt for Angel, the most dangerous player between both colonies, Kashimo Hajime, would have surely encountered the child prodigy. Controversial topic incoming. Based on this specific comment by Yuta himself, it is up for debate that Hakari, when his boss music is playing, is stronger than Yuta. Whether or not you truly believe this statement or just think Yuta was capping out of respect for his senior, we are not looking to get into that topic today. One of the biggest factors in this battle would be exactly how strong is Kashimo. Because to be completely frank, in this timeline, I don't think Okkotsu is coming within 10 feet of otaku-ass Charles. And if he does, well, I don't think it would end up with Charles upset and sitting on the sidewalk afterwards. Eventually, on the hunt for Angel, who we now know was never even in Tokyo 2, Tengen. Another thing you got wrong, Tengen. Yuta would notice that most of Tokyo Colony's 2 population has been dwindled down to just non-sorcerers at this point. As Panda even brings up in the original timeline, there's nothing around but the smell of blood in the air. Based on Kashimo's point total and brutal introduction, the man has clearly been busy. It's truly a matter of whoever runs into him first. Panda did originally, but as someone who is very good at hiding their cursed energy residue, it may be hard for Okkotsu to initially track down, unless he follows the bodies. Does Panda get broken down and bullied again? Let me know in the comments what you want, and I'll reveal his fate in the next Hakari vs Sendai Colony video. Okkotsu Yuta and Hajime Kashimo, a duo of hymns, face to face. Based on Yuta's starting point and the fact Hajime has already eliminated most of the current population, it's well within Okkotsu's interest to befriend the reincarnated player. He's worth more alive with 100 points than he is as a 5-point W. But we both know that's not how real G's operate. To be fair, as we see from his first introductions with Panda in the original timeline, Hajime is always hostile at first contact. If you're a player, you're an enemy, which in a battle royale, fair behavior. So on the grounds of close quarters combat, while we've seen Okkotsu keep up with strong hand-to-hand contenders like Itadori Yuji, Hajime has matched and even outperformed a powerhouse like Hakari that was a way stronger foe than Yuji at the time. Hajime's physical feats are notable in that he was able to effectively punch a fucking shipping container and then volley said shipping container back and forth with his opponent. Kashimo was also nimble enough to dodge most of Hakari's critical attacks. For a sorcerer without any special upgrades or power-ups, his main advantage here, quite honestly, are his hands. Where in his battle with Hakari, while jackpotted, Hakari all but ignored Kashimo's electrified curse attacks. Against someone like Okkotsu, without natural defense to cursed energy traits, Kashimo's bare-knuckle attack power surpasses the child prodigy. Although, that same prodigy has been shown to toss an entire car back when fighting Yuji, so despite being physically lacking, his boundless cursed energy does make up for that. Yuta would never be flat outclassed in close quarters either. In his original Sendai timeline, his efficiency against Ishigori Ryu is notable. Even though Ishigori's output level of cursed energy was much higher, Okkotsu's quick thinking and versatility kept him in a winning position over the sorcerer. And Heian-era Kashimo wasn't even willing to waste his time with Ishigori, something that I do feel holds weight. Hajime, being the aggressive player that he is, probably wouldn't even allow for a brief exchange of dialogue until a proper level of respect has been established between these two fighters. Just like in the Hakari battle, they really only introduced themselves when they reached neutral ground. Hajime going for first blood, attempting to give Okkotsu the smoke. He'd be surprised when Yuta can actually bring a similar energy. Although Yuta would be lower in attack power, where he'd make up for this is his swordsmanship. While Hajime's rod may offer back and forth melee combat, it's not a preferred style for Kashimo by any means. Yuta has been shown to put enough force into his swings to break combat knives, and Kashimo needs to save that rod for contingency. Okkotsu, when up against Kurourushi, has been shown able to create cursed energy shockwaves with little drain on his tank. So when pushed into a corner, Yuta can definitely surpass Kashimo's limits for brief moments. His boundless amounts of cursed energy should be able to dull the electrifying trait of Kashimo's attacks as well, at least enough for Yuta to remain agile in combat. After exchanging heavy hits and becoming familiar with each other's game, the two players would introduce themselves. However, upon realizing the threat level of Hajime, whether with or without Yuta's will, this fight would become a 2-on-1 battle. Rika, the special grade curse spirit, would partially manifest on the battlefield. Its terrifying aura would send a chill down Kashimo's spine, but the man would tremble from excitement, not fear. This is where it must be established how Rika stacks up to a sorcerer like Hajime. Although partially manifested, Rika retains the strength to collapse an entire bridge. Also, restrain a physically powerful foe like Yuji with little to no effort on her own part. Using Rika as insurance, her fists manifesting in perfect angles or openings in Kashimo's combo strings would strike considerable damage into the reincarnated sorcerer, while Yuta can be the speed, dishing out enough attacks to keep Hajime's attention. Rika's heavy blows can offer finisher opportunities. Once again, it's doubtful Okkotsu would really be going for the endgame here. An unconscious knockout would suffice, as, once again, Hajime is more valuable alive than gone. But Kashimo operates under different philosophy. Take no prisoners. With all the odds against him, definitely not coming out of a 2-on-1 against the child prodigy and the Queen of Curses with any chance of victory. Hajime had his fun, but he needs to end this battle, with every assumption leading him to believe Rika goes if Yuta does too. After some clever positioning, Kashimo would reach out for, quite honestly, his one and only win condition against the cursed child, a bolt of lightning, created from the positive charges imprinted on Yuta from Kashimo's attacks, and the negative charges controlled by him personally. An attack that can't miss with no domain required would definitely land on Okkotsu without fail. Not just because of its blinding speed, but because of its unpredictability. Yuta has absolutely no way of seeing this coming. As stated before, this is Hajime's one and only way he can get victory on Yuta, and it's only if it lands on his head. Reverse curse technique is directly controlled by the brain. If that isn't taken out with the lightning strike, Okkotsu can revive. Able to restore Yuji's heart, regrow body parts like fingers, Okkotsu Yuta's reverse curse technique is amplified immensely by his massive stock of energy. Although he can run out, meaning if he's caught once worn down, Yuta could potentially lose all chances of regeneration. Nah, Okkotsu Yuta still has his curse technique, with Rika as his storage of latent power and an even larger mass of cursed energy. It's almost as if Yuta carries with him a second life. After this revival, things really don't look good for Kashimo. A fully manifested Rika, who was able to pass attacks back and forth with Ishigori Ryu just on her own, and synchronized Yuta, who now has full access to all of his copied curse techniques and tools. Curse speech, creating Shikigami from his hair. Imagine if he did take out Charles' future sight. What a nice little addition. Although the orbiting domain and sky manipulation from the OG timeline might be cooler. My point is, Kashimo's only hope is to land a headshot with that lightning bolt attack as early as he can. If not, Yuta, also known right now as Himothy, just has way too many options at his disposal to eliminate Hajime. And considering a battle with Yuta is never a true one-on-one, it makes sense why Sendai Colony, a big free-for-all battle between those high-level sorcerers, lasted so long. But as soon as Yuta got Ryu alone, he mollywopped him in seconds. It's unfair how handicapped Okkotsu can be in a solo battle, not even considering this man's domain expansion. Innate technique yet to be seen. Kashimo does have Hollow Wicker Basket, as well as his own unknown curse technique that he's saving for Sukuna. But based on how he was willing to just have Hakari take him out instead of using it to pull a last-minute W, it doesn't seem like he's gonna be wasting it on anybody but the king himself. You do know what would be really cool? If you think Kashimo's electricity isn't some sort of genetic or unique trait, and more so just control of his energy. Technically, Yuta, basically young Goku out here stealing techniques, could maybe copy that control and end the fight copying Kashimo's lightning bolt attack. Headcanon is cool sometimes. Welcome back to the Culling Games Reverse, the series where we take the most recent battle-fueled arc of Jujutsu Kaisen and switch around some character roles to make the fights more interesting. Last battle, Yuta Okkotsu easily picked up a W from Tokyo Colony 2, unfortunately losing Kashimo's points after having to take him out completely. And with no exchange rule made due to the events of Tokyo Colony 1, it's up to Hakari Kinji, now making his way into Sendai Colony to rack up some points for his fellow students. This time on the Culling Games Reverse, I'm gonna have my man Broken Ronin here to go ahead and narrate this timeline with me.
Yo, what is up, guys?
Alright, so Ronin, the way that we normally do things here is what we'll do is we'll put Hakari in Yuta's shoes, taking Hakari through the exact things that Yuta would have gone through in Sendai Colony, seeing if some things kind of divert, change, or seeing if he flat out just loses entirely. So of course, the first thing that Yuta runs into is Dhruv, and Dhruv's orbiting domain and his giant guinea pigs. And Hakari, basically getting randomly teleported into Sendai Colony like most other sorcerers would probably want to deal with the giant guinea pigs first of all things. So I know we didn't really see much of Dhruv. He kind of gets off-screened by Yuta, but we kind of know the basic idea of what Dhruv can do, and we've seen a lot of what Yuta can do. So going based off of those two things and the outcome of that.
Yeah, so I think we can pretty confidently say that Dhruv is the weakest of the four that are within the deadlock, considering that Yuta seems to beat him with the most ease without using something like reverse curse technique, without bringing out Rika's full power, and obviously without bringing out any numerous amount of abilities that he's copied in his past. So I think we could say that Dhruv, on the scale of Ishigori, Uro, and Kurourushi, is probably the weakest. And I would venture to say that Hakari, probably under the right circumstances, would be able to take him down. Yuta seems to have taken down Dhruv first, and the orbiting Shikigami secondarily, like after the fact. So I would wager that being able to just defeat Dhruv would mean that you are beating the Shikigami as a whole. I don't know if you think that there's some contention with that, if you think that Dhruv is putting up much of a physical fight. To me, his claim to fame seems to be from the fact that his Shikigami create this like orbiting constant domain.
Yeah, I completely agree. It really seems like his claim to fame is the orbiting domain and just his area of effect attack and his area of effect kind of danger, because the two guinea pigs, from what we see in other chapters that don't directly involve Dhruv, they are doing a decent amount of damage to the colony. They're doing a decent amount of damage to the world around them. And I imagine low-level sorcerers probably don't stand much of a chance against them. But if we look at Dhruv at all, he kind of looks like a pretty scrawny guy. So I really don't see him putting up much of a physical fight. The only kind of contention that I would maybe have with this is the way that we see Yuta kind of use Dhruv's technique with the orbiting domain and the Shikigami kind of being able to cut anything inside of the domain. But if it was really that overpowered, I don't think Yuta would have had as easy of a time as he did.
Yeah, it seems to be the case that Dhruv kind of was a hard counter to Kurourushi, because Kurourushi goes dormant until Dhruv dies. And the reason I think Kurourushi was so worried about someone like Dhruv is because, like you said, the wide range of attacks basically nullifying the efficacy of all of Kurourushi's mini cockroaches. I think that Dhruv, rather than being super powerful comparatively to Ishigori, Uro, and even Kurourushi himself, just had a really good hacks that was pretty primed to deal with like crowd control. And I think that if Hakari comes in there ready to scrap, deciding that he's going to attack the person who's actually deploying the Shikigami rather than trying to deal with the massive one himself, he probably would be able to handle Dhruv relatively quickly. Once again, it's kind of hard to say how strong Dhruv is physically, but Yuta seemed to have taken him down with so much, like, just so casually that it's hard to really say that Dhruv is that much of a physical, fighter, that much of a combatant at all once you get up close and personal.
Exactly. And be it as it may, it seems like it's something that Hakari could probably off-screen himself, be it base or jackpot, whatever he needs. It seems like once he's able to get to the focal point, Dhruv himself, it wouldn't be much of a threat. What I feel like a much more important question would be, as we know in the original timeline with Yuta, he's going around the colony saving all of the innocent people. Do you think that that's something that Hakari would basically waste time doing?
Yeah, I don't really know. Hakari does not strike me as the altruistic type. He may tell him to just run away and just leave it at that, but I don't think he's out here giving these people a stadium and allocating like a ton of his power to make sure to keep them safe. Like Yuta makes sure that Rika saves them or whatever and does her best to keep all the civilians safe. Not only does Hakari not have that option of just deploying a separate entity to do that, but I also don't think Hakari cares that much. So I think I can just imagine him beating Dhruv and just kind of keeping it pushing.
Completely. And I think that actually kind of changes things a little bit in this new timeline here, because Yuta basically kind of draws all of the people together and makes a big giant meal for Kurourushi to appear for. Whether, you know, all of those people get eaten or not, you know, Yuta does kind of save them with Rika, as you mentioned. But in this timeline, if Hakari's not rounding up all these people, Kurourushi may appear somewhere else. It may go completely different. So, I mean, Kurourushi is definitely, now that Dhruv is going to be gone, is going to wake up and is going to start causing some problems and wanting to eat people. But it is kind of called into contention that if he would reach Kurourushi first. So
yeah.
That being said, because Kurourushi, you know, may end up somewhere else, it's more likely that after seeing that Dhruv got taken out, someone like Ishigori or Yoro, as we see, would want to know what's going on with Hakari. Ishigori, after seeing if he does see domain expansion, would probably be the first one stepping up to Hakari, don't you think?
Yeah, I think Ishigori would want every piece of that if he decided. He said he saw someone with the domain expansion pop out. Yeah, he'd probably want to go all out right from the jump.
Ishigori and his hunger and Hakari's fever, you know, I feel like these two would probably get along fairly well.
So I think if we see that Ishigori is jumping down there to bite at jackpot Hakari, we're just gonna get into a straight brawl. Like kind of similarly to how we see with Yuta versus Ishigori in the beginning of their fight. We're probably just gonna see them go back and forth and just really just duke it out. Ishigori's massive output versus Hakari's like infinite cursed energy and reverse curse technique. And how do you really think that goes? Like how do you think Hakari ends up dealing with the output that can even send Yuta flying?
It's definitely a good matchup, I would say, with Ishigori having, for all we know, the strongest cursed energy output of any person that we've seen in the series. I definitely think they give Hakari a run for his money. Despite Hakari showing great feats, even in base form when it comes to hand, I definitely think, even though Charles isn't really that much of an opponent, I definitely think the 2-second future sight is something that levels him up enough, and the way that Hakari deals with it is enough to show that, one, his speed, his power, and the way that his cursed energy works with his chiseled, his sandpaper trait definitely gives him an edge, even against someone like Ishigori, because despite Ishigori's output, whether he uses Granite Blast or not, if we're just talking straight hands, Hakari is gonna have the advantage, because when he fought Kashimo, he was already fighting someone that had another cursed energy trait. Kashimo's cursed energy trait and Hakari's, in my opinion, kind of maybe bounced off of each other, whereas Ishigori is gonna have to deal with that.
I think Ishigori would just have to try to handle that. And I do think it would be something that adds to the pain factor, although I don't know if I think it would add too much extra damage. Actually, quite different from Kashimo's. Kashimo seems to have a very real effect that actually paralyzes the opponent, whereas Hakari seems to be adding more to the pain. And I think Ishigori is the type of person that can deal with that. I mean, as we see with him in Sendai Colony and his fight against Yuta, he's out here tanking his own Granite Blast multiple times and still keep on pushing. So I think Ishigori would be able to adapt and keep going. I don't know if I think Hakari has the durability to get hit with the Granite Blasts or the super heavy punches that were able to knock Yuta off his guard or like completely rip off his hand. And obviously Hakari has reverse curse technique, and I don't think that any casual attack from Ishigori is going to take him out, but I do wonder if Hakari would be just about as even with someone like Ishigori as he was with Kashimo.
Well, it all really comes down to Hakari's domain expansion at that point, because without having reverse curse technique, even if he does manage to live after taking a Granite Blast, the injury or damage that Hakari suffers is going to be enough to take him out of the battle. His domain expansion and his infinite cursed energy with the reverse curse technique, just the passive ability, is going to be necessary for him to get through Ishigori, and that's for sure. I feel like at that point it comes down to whether or not Ishigori is going to be able to keep up with Hakari like Kashimo did.
I don't know about you. I do think that Ishigori is probably comparable to Jackpot Hakari if they're just trying to go blow for blow. Hakari may have a little bit more strength. You may argue that he's a little bit faster as well, but I think that would kind of be made up in the fact that Ishigori has the potential option of long range attacks that can really, like, unlike Kashimo, who can only use those like lightning bolts occasionally in a fight, Ishigori does not seem to be hesitant to fire off a Granite Blast to give himself some space or really to just try to burn away his opponent. And I don't know about you, Ishigori to me seems like a discerning enough opponent to, after a round or two of domain expansion from Hakari, figure out that if he wants to take him down, the way to do so is in the intervals between the domain expansions.
No, I completely agree with you. And I more so say that it comes down to the question of Ishigori being able to survive or not, as more so it becoming a battle of attrition. I'm sure Ishigori would be able to figure out the interval between the domain expansion, especially like you mentioned how he is able to freely just fire off Granite Blast, no problem. He really doesn't need much much cooldown, right? That was established where he can kind of fire granite blasts without much time in between blasts. So it's probably very easy for him to take advantage of that time in between. But as we also saw with Hakari getting hit from Kashimo's lightning bolts, was that even when severely damaged, Hakari can domain expansion. While this is all luck based, he could potentially completely revive himself and survive one of those hits if it gets too critical. Whereas Ishigori is definitely going to be a very tough opponent for Hakari, more so because his reverse curse technique is limited and it only lasts for a certain amount of time. Whether or not Ishigori is going to be able to hit that mark in between, which is his basic win condition, it's going to be kind of tough in my opinion. But like you said, he does present a really good matchup for Hakari. I think it's going to be really close to call, whereas I think what the most important thing to do would be focus on someone like Yoro and see how someone like Yoro would fare against Hakari.
For Uro, I feel like she's also a weird matchup for Hakari because of her ability to redirect and like warp the sky. And we see how that works against someone like Yuta, where she's able to redirect his punches and keep them from hitting her. She's able to react to like granite blasts and kind of keep up with characters like Ishigori and Yuta in combat. Even though she doesn't really present herself as a super durable fighter, I mean, we see her take a combination attack from Yuta and fully awakened Rika, just comboing her before she gets knocked down, and then she's able to match Ishigori and Yuta with a triple domain expansion. So while her hacks are very important and they're like very prominent in how she displays herself as a fighter, I feel like it also shouldn't be ignored that she's actually a pretty sturdy character, all things considered. And I feel like for someone like Hakari, even if he does keep getting into jackpot over and over and over, I wonder what the cost is to manipulate the sky. And if it's very low, that war of attrition could be something that goes on for a very long time, because I don't know if you agree, but I feel like Hakari would have a hard time landing significant hits on her just because of her sky manipulation.
I feel like Yoro is a weird case for Hakari because due to Hakari mostly focusing on hand-to-hand, even when his domain is casted and he's able to get the jackpot and is boosted by his boss music, as I've been calling it, it's gonna be tough for him to land any kind of critical injury on her when, as you mentioned, she's fighting Yuta. She's just able to basically warp all of his hits around her and then use that same kind of sky manipulation to then land critical counterattacks on Yuta. So I feel like Yoro is going to be a pretty hard counter for Hakari. Now, the one thing that I feel like a lot of people do forget, and I'm actually even forgetting it and mentioning it, is the doors that come with Hakari's curse technique, which I know is kind of, we're not really sure where they come from, whether it's just an extension of his domain expansion. Now, I feel like that, now, you know what, even that would kind of be hard, because if she can make the sky a surface, she can just block that, can't she?
Yeah, she should definitely be able to. Like, I feel like the only thing with Uro is if you think she can react to a specific character's attacks, her sky manipulation should be able to redirect them. I mean, just looking at it from a pure power standpoint, she's able to redirect what seems to be pretty casually a granite blast from Ishigori. Ishigori, as we've said, has the highest recorded output in the Culling games. If she can redirect that, she should be able to redirect the train doors and Hakari's punches. I feel like Hakari is just going to have a ton of trouble. And the fact that he didn't use those doors against someone like Kashimo implies that he doesn't think it's super useful against very high level, nice special grade opponents. You know what I mean? Like, if that was so useful in a close quarters combat scenario, why not use that against Kashimo?
You've got a really good point. While we haven't really touched on their domain expansions, both Yoro and Ishigori, I feel like we can save that for later, as well as more of our discussion on whether Hakari would be able to best Ishigori or not. I feel like right now it seems like with both Yoro and Ishigori, no matter who he ends up running into, Hakari's definitely got a really hard fight coming up against him.
Hakari, to me, his biggest thing is just the longevity he has at his disposal. It's not so much that Hakari's, like, in one jackpot round, I don't think Hakari can take these guys down. Even in 2, maybe even 3. The thing he has going for him is if you think he can consistently hit it before they're able to take him out, Hakari will eventually win just due to the nature of him basically having infinite stamina and infinite domains just via his jackpot. And by that, I think it's possible for him to win. But in that scenario, he's going to have a very, very high level of difficulty fight because, like we said, Ishigori can just meet him blow for blow and maybe even surpass him in terms of his physical punches. And Ishigori also is no slouch, like taking his own attacks, being able to get hit by a granite blast and be able to just outright body like Rika's blast and things of that nature. And then Uro obviously has the hacks to just avoid Hakari's physical attacks altogether. And it kind of makes you question, can Hakari beat them in a timely manner, or is it only something, is his only win con just hitting enough jackpots over and over and over again until they run out of stamina?
Come on top of that, depending on the way that this timeline ends up going, whether he's fighting them one-on-one, let's say he does end up beating either Uro or Ishigori, he's just got the other one waiting for him. As we see with Uro, who basically kind of just sneak attacks Yuta after he finishes off Kurourushi, she's not afraid to go in once they're vulnerable. Let's say Hakari does beat Ishigori as the domain starts wearing off. She's basically just going to be watching this entire fight. Vice versa, same with Uro. I mean, depending on the way that it works, Hakari and Uro's fight may get interrupted by Ishigori depending on who comes first, but that's a topic once again we can get into later. Either way, I feel like we both established that Hakari is not going to have as easy of a time, whether you want to call it what Yuta had an easy time, as Yuta did in Sendai. It's definitely going to be way more challenging, and that all comes down to Hakari basically being bound to all of his power, all of his hacks behind his domain expansion, and behind 4 minutes and 11 seconds.
He's got 4 minutes and 11 seconds to really put in a lot of work before he has to try it again. And you mentioning the possibility of Ishigori interrupting a fight similar to how he did versus when Yuta and Uro were fighting, it brought to mind a very scary possibility for Hakari, and that's if Hakari opens up a domain expansion and then closes Uro within his barrier, and Ishigori, being impatient, just shoots it down with granite blast, like destroying the barrier from the outside. Something that we've seen is decently, like, not easy per se, but it's definitely a very real reality for characters. We see Yuji do it with Mahito's barrier, and we see Megumi's able to force his way into Dagon's domain via his own domain expansion. I wonder if, like, because being impatient is definitely in character for Ishigori, I just wonder if he shoots a granite blast at it mid-domain expansion before Hakari can get a roll. Does that kind of mess Hakari up? Because if he doesn't have that infinite or like cursed energy or resets back to his normal level, he probably wouldn't be able to open a domain expansion again, and he would probably just be stuck fighting in base, which I think me and you both agree like is a loss for Hakari. Do you think that's a real potential outcome for that character?
That is a real danger and definitely a real threat that Ishigori presents. It's one reason that Hakari and Sendai definitely all comes down to chance and the way that things all work out, it seems. And not even just that. And that's definitely a situation that could end up taking out not just Hakari, but also Uro, depending on how big of a granite blast that is, and if neither of them are even aware that that's an attack that's coming for them. They're both completely focused on each other, and Ishigori puts enough of cursed energy behind it. I mean, he could basically, one, if Hakari hasn't reached jackpot yet, do some real damage to him that he's not going to be able to fix. I mean, we have seen Hakari be able to move his domain. Is a sorcerer really going to be able to be aware of what's happening outside of their domain when they're putting so much contention inside of their domain? I definitely feel like that's a discussion that we could have, but one thing that I want to get to before we discuss Uro, Ishigori, everyone all coming at each other at once is, let's say he beats Ishigori, he beats Uro. In this timeline, he's able to take on one of them. Before he's able to claim victory, Kurourushi finally meets Hakari's way. How does Hakari kind of deal with Kurourushi, in your opinion?
To me, Kurourushi is a little bit of an easier fight than Uro and Ishigori. And the reason I say this for someone specifically like Hakari is because Kurourushi, to me, doesn't have the physical stats or like cursed energy output of someone like Ishigori. And he doesn't have hacks that are specifically difficult to deal with for someone like Hakari in the same way that Uro does. While Kurourushi is strong and Yuta is pushed to use reverse curse technique, that is a Yuta that is, once again, severely holding back, trying not to show his hand to onlookers at the time, and he's allocating Rika to save other civilians. So this Yuta can barely be called Yuta at this point, just based on the amount of power that he's attempting to output here. Kurourushi getting the best of him isn't too impressive in my mind, at least when we're comparing him to like a potential jackpot Hakari. I think Kurourushi could still land with the blade, the blade that like spawns the bugs inside of Yuta and whatnot. As we see, reverse curse technique can pretty soundly deal with that. And if Hakari's reverse curse technique is so potent that he can heal literal headshots with lightning bolts, I don't see why he wouldn't be able to survive something that Yuta seemed to be able to pretty easily survive himself. I imagine that instead of taking him down via reverse curse technique in the same way that Yuta did, he would just demolish the curse spirit with raw physical attacks, pretty much reducing it to ashes, and maybe having to fight Kurourushi one more time, I guess, if we know that it spawns via the Progenesis. I think Kurourushi generally is a significantly easier matchup than Uro and Ishigori.
So it's really funny that you say that, because I actually feel the exact
exact opposite. I feel like Kurourushi would be a pretty rough opponent for Hakari, simply based off of the multiplying and mass amount of cockroaches infused with cursed energy, that basically what we've seen is to eat people and eat their skin completely to their skeletons. How is Hakari someone that is a purely close quarters fighter who does have plenty of speed, does have plenty of power, does have plenty of durability and versatility within them? How are they going to deal with a mountain or just torrential wave and downpour of cockroaches that are planning to just eat them alive? How is Hakari going to deal with that, in your opinion?
Yeah, so to me, Hakari just has to brute force that. And that is a good point that I didn't even really consider, because Yuta dealt with it so easily that it kind of even, it didn't even process as something that would trouble Hakari. And that's a good point. I do think Hakari would just have to try to brute force that. I do think that his durability, because of how much curse energy would be flowing through him, would allow him to not be torn apart in the same way that that random civilian was able to. Yuta seems to be able to block the cockroaches' onslaught with his blade. He seems to also be able to destroy them pretty easily with his burst of curse energy. So I don't think that, I mean, individually, Yuta just says that they're not strong, but it's the swarm that makes him tough. I think Hakari would be able to run through them. We kind of see him do something somewhat in the same vein when he's fighting Kashimo on the water, when he's running through the Shikigami and like absolutely blasting through multiple of them at one time. I do think that he'd be able to do something similar where he's just running through them and attacking them. But if you do think that they're like some omnidirectional wave of cockroaches that he wouldn't be able to really dodge or avoid or even attack before they attack him, I could definitely see them actually causing a bit of a problem for him. So that's a fair point.
I guess this is really all what it comes down to, because his reverse curse technique is automatic, and we do see that it works very quickly. I mean, it's even quick enough to restore Hakari's entire arm fast enough before Kashimo can look at the ground and look back up at Hakari. It really all comes down to, like you said, if he can brute force it. I just have this very tough vision of Hakari in my mind consistently restoring himself as he's charging through just a wave of cockroaches and just punching the shit out of Kurourushi, but that's just me.
Yeah, just him swimming through the wave and just being like, I'm not feeling the fever yet. Yeah, I can really imagine Hakari getting through them and then going to the main threat. The only thing that I think can maybe present a problem is it takes a lot of time to do that, and as we know, time isn't necessarily on Hakari's side when he's in Jackpot. Obviously, he can always open up a domain and go for it again, but every time he does that, he's leaving himself open to attacks, especially against someone like Kurourushi, which it seems to be a much more aggressive fighter, just going for the kill instantly with its cursed tools and things of that nature. But I do think overall Hakari would be able to make it through Kurourushi's defenses and beat him a little bit easier than Ishigori and Uro.
I definitely feel like while the wave of cockroaches can present the largest threat, Hakari does have all the tools to deal with all of the different things that Kurourushi can do with the festering life sword, the different Shikigami that he summoned. Overall, he does seem to be not able to take much damage, as we see Yuta kind of eliminate him not once but twice with blasts of reverse curse technique pretty fairly easily. What I feel like the biggest question is, because we all know what Sendai is most known for, which is the big battle royale between all of the big four pillars of sorcerers. We talked a little bit before about Ishigori interrupting a fight with Hakari and Uro. Now, let's say we've got all four of them. Dhruv is taken out. Hakari and Uro meet up and are fighting. Ishigori interrupts the domain expansion, but Uro and Hakari are able to survive. All four of them are fighting with Ishigori, Uro, and Kurourushi maybe a little bit distracted. Hakari is going to be able to thrive in this battle royale environment, or do we think that he's actually going to be kind of put at a disadvantage here?
In some senses, he would be doing well if Uro's slightly distracted with the likes of Kurourushi and he can a little bit 1v1 Ishigori a little bit more. I do think that would be better than if he was just to straight up face both of them or all three of them at one time. However, the one thing that kind of goes back to a scenario I talked about earlier is a potential Hakari opens his domain and in response, Ishigori and Uro open theirs. Even if we say that Kurourushi doesn't enter, which I do think is very likely that he would try to enter and disrupt things, the idea of Ishigori and Uro potentially negating the effects of Hakari's domain and not allowing him to get a jackpot is a very real possibility in my mind. And we see the opening of 3 domain domain expansions that aren't extremely compatible with one another makes them likely to disrupt anyways. And as I mentioned, I don't know if I think Hakari has enough curse energy in base to open a domain expansion directly after one, right? If he opens it and fails to get a jackpot, I don't really imagine him being able to open it again. And as we mentioned earlier, that leaves base Hakari in a battlefield with Ishigori, Uro, and Kurourushi, which is a fight I don't think he wins by any means.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you where if Hakari is interrupted mid-domain and is not able to get that cursed energy boost and basically get recharged, I definitely don't see him bringing out another domain expansion either, and that puts him at a huge disadvantage. And while, as we talked about, he's already going to have a challenge with Uro Ishigori 1v1, having the other one kind of step in and be able to present even more of a problem, I feel like does make it even harder for Hakari. Even with reverse curse technique being automatic, and if he is able to somehow land a jackpot, with everything going on, makes it even harder for Hakari to land any kind of critical hits.
I think Hakari probably individually, as we said, may have the tools to deal with them 1v1, but if people are coming in and out of the battle very quickly, all of them being relative to him, or at least somewhat contentious fighters for him, I don't really see him coming out of that in a very advantageous position or him winning at all.
Yeah, it's a little unfortunate, it really is, but it seems like even if Hakari ends up fighting Uro, if he ends up fighting Ishigori, no matter which one he ends up fighting first, if he fights Uro, Ishigori's gonna get involved, and that's not gonna go well with him. If he fights Ishigori first, he may win, he may lose. Either way, whatever happens once he wins, he's gonna get sneak attacked by either Uro or Kurourushi. If Uro sneak attacks him, that's gonna be another top tier opponent Hakari has to face that may or may not go well for him, especially after he just fought Ishigori, and technically, if we're saying this, he won. And then either way, he's still gonna have another opponent that's waiting for him. Or if it all goes into some crazy battle royale, all the odds are stacked against Hakari, and it seems like Ishigori probably be the most likely winner of the battle royale if that was the way that things went. I don't know if you agree.
I think even in a battle royale situation, we do see that Uro and Ishigori are willing to like unofficially team up to take down the biggest threat. Like we see that they kind of double team Yuta before Rika's pulled out, and that's because Yuta seems to be the one that is the greatest threat and greatest disruptor. So if they see that Ishigori used some weird jackpot and got some like infinite cursed energy, and he seems to be able to keep hitting jackpots, even if they don't decide that they're going to work together very consciously or out loud, they're just going to kind of focus their attacks on him. And I really don't think that he's able to deal with those, both of them attacking him in the same way that Yuta would be able to.
Yeah, so that kind of settles it. Unfortunately, that's going to be a fat L under Hakari. And unfortunately, he is not going to be able to accomplish his goals or help Megumi or Yuji or open that fight club that he wants to. Welcome back to the Culling game reversed. Today we'll be completely swapping the duo of Maki Zenin and Noritoshi Kamo with our two golden boys, Yuji Itadori and Megumi Fushiguro, pitting them up against the major threat of Sakurajima Colony, Naoya Zenin in his disgusting vengeful spirit form. Not even Maki in her half-awakened state could survive the danger cursed Naoya was able to bring to the table, with his ascended form leading to blinding speed and indomitable attack power. But with Chimera Shadow Garden and left-right good night, could this be just another exorcism for the Jujutsu High students? Let's get into the nitty-gritty and see if Naoya in his cursed form can obtain the Zenin clan head title he wanted so badly in his first life. If this sounds interesting to you, please go ahead and drop a like on the video, hit the subscribe button if you want to see more content like this, and most importantly, thank you for watching. On the brink of entering Tokyo Colony, and just before the two Jujutsu High students are separated by the barrier's teleportation clause, Naoya Zenin rises from the ashes of his premature death as a vengeful spirit, fueled by nothing but gross regret and disgusting desires of becoming the clan head and eliminating the girl that embarrassed him in his final moments. In this version of the timeline, not only does cursed Naoya awaken much sooner than before, he finds Megumi Megumi and Yuji first. Of course, Naoya begins the brief encounter in his first stage as a cursed womb, and in this sickly transformation, Naoya resembles a large, girthy worm that accurately depicts the Zenin heir as a sprawling insect. However, despite his massive size, cursed Naoya, even in his early stages, is able to blink past Kamo Noritoshi's senses, using speed that is said to be faster than sound. Like a jet plane, as Naoya closes in on his opponent with pure precision, the world around him crashes and shatters from the intense air current and energy generated from the vengeful spirit, just tearing through the air at such a rate. And although Maki Zenin, after fully awakening, is able to react and properly time counterattacks against this beast, it's primarily thanks to her extrasensory and precognition gifted to her by the heavenly restriction. And while that is also a much faster form of cursed Naoya, let's not get too ahead of ourselves. While moving at this intense speed, first stage Naoya slams his body into Maki with such force as to leave a crater in the mountain they crash into. Although the level of power is not too impressive, a character with durability like Maki would be one of the only people to walk away after that kind of attack with little to no damage. Again, even with Maki's enhanced reflexes, she's barely able to keep up with cursed Naoya's combos, using every inch of his body, including his fist, to dish out multiple strikes with considerable attack strength thanks to the overwhelming speed behind them. The durability of first stage Curse Womb Naoya is enough at least to survive an attack that splits him in half from the soul cutting blade, and also a direct hit from a piercing blood from Kamo, which the latter assumes should have been enough to exorcise it. So I guess to start finding out the result of this fight, we would have to wholeheartedly consider what Itadori and Megumi are even able to do against a monster coming at them with this level of perception blitzing. Against a three-finger Sukuna, whose speed was clocked at damn near Toji Fushiguro levels, a character that is also able to easily overwhelm Megumi in speed multiple times over during the Shibuya incident, not only does Megumi stand at a disadvantage against cursed Naoya, a speedster and quote-unquote unbreakable doll like Itadori Yuji is also gonna find it hard to keep up. Based on the short battle between Yuji, Maki, and Sukuna, it's fair to say that while Itadori does have impressive speed feats, he's never been known to move at such a pace he completely outright catches people off guard. Yuji doesn't speed blitz Choso or Mahito in Shibuya, nor does he against Higuruma when forced to purely rely on his physical stats. And getting back to the duo match with Maki, she openly admits to holding her own speed back to better cooperate with Yuji, finally opting to kick things up when they realize they're not putting enough pressure on the 15-finger Sukuna. If Maki is faster than Yuji, and Toji and Maki are of equal stats, whether you want to argue about their experience levels or not, speed-wise, Itadori is without a doubt slower than what cursed Naoya will be at, considering Maki's just quicker than Naoya's final speed. And because the two students will be struggling to even keep up with some of the attacks they're being hit with, even in a 2-on-1 scenario shown in the original Sakurajima colony, it's almost like Naoya can go back and forth between opponents like it's nothing thanks to his acceleration. Meaning, despite Megumi and his 10 Shadows technique offering plenty of different offensive strategies, especially with a partner like Yuji, every single Shadow's viability is put into question because Naoya can just speed blitz and pierce them instantly. One by one, as Megumi summons his Shikigami, they would be vaporized by one quick burst of acceleration from Curse Womb Naoya, as unfortunately, not a lot of them are gonna be as durable as awakened Maki. Fushiguro also is unable to partially summon his Shikigami like Sukuna to eliminate that destruction weakness, meaning every time he tries to use the 10 Shadows, he's taking a major risk of losing one of them. That means Divine Dog Totality won't have any chance to land a deep slash, Max Elephant can't crush it or shoot a water stream without imploding, Rapid Escape can be blitzed through from multiple different directions and angles in such a short span of time, it doesn't really offer many escape options, and even something like Piercing Ox that can hacks and run for long enough to do some serious damage won't be able to accomplish much before Naoya takes it out. Now, Madoka Deer, with its ability to emit an area of effect field of reverse curse technique, would offer Megumi the option to output positive energy and exercise Naoya that way, but it would have to be timed properly to catch Naoya in a speed burst, otherwise it's just a keep away shield for Naoya until he uses a different strategy or evolves further. But let's still stay on first form Naoya for now. Not even Chimera Shadow Garden, Megumi's domain expansion is a very viable option to stop Cursed Naoya with. Because Megumi lacks the ability to create an actual barrier and trap his opponent, there's no way they're going to be able to contain a speedster like Naoya. And considering the way he uses his acceleration, just ripping around the entire city in Sakurajima to build up speed, Naoya's not very likely to stay in one location. They can't even try and trap Naoya in some kind of structure or building because he can just openly destroy anything with his speed and attack stats. As durable and strong as Yuji is, even if he's able to land a strike on the Vengeful Spirit, it's unknown what it actually takes to exercise Naoya. Considering the 2 heavy attacks he suffers from Makin Kamo and Cursed Womb stage, he survives. And with Soul Splitting Blade being a sword that ignores durability, it's unknown how deep his defense stat actually goes in first stage. His second stage was known to include a Binding Vow where he was more vulnerable when he was still, to keep his body extra hardened when speeding up. However, it's unsure if this vow takes place after or before Naoya hatches from his Curse Womb, but considering just how devastated the 2 of them would be just against stage 1 Naoya, I doubt that would even matter much. Because let's say somehow, again, not entirely sure how these characters with the arsenals they have would accomplish this, but let's say they do beat Cursed Naoya. After he hatches into his second stage, there is absolutely no room for debate. When Naoya reaches his second form, the Death Cocoon, or as I like to call it, the Misogyny Missile, not only does his speed drastically amplify, his range of attacks increase as well, regaining the ability to use the Curse Technique Projection Sorcery. Naoya is able to extend his cursed energy into the air itself and force them to abide by 24 frames. When the air inevitably freezes, he breaks it and causes an implosion of force that can cause damaging explosions to an individual. Not only making Naoya a mid to long range combat threat, with his speed growing exponentially, he becomes too much for an even half awakened Maki to withstand. Kamo Noritoshi himself is barely able to survive and save his own life by applying a shield of blood to his head just before a quick punch from Naoya decapitates him. And that wasn't with any speed built up at all. However, like in his Curse Womb, the real threat stems from Cursed Naoya's acceleration. Now having an inlet built into his back to remove resistance and allowing the curse to more accurately adapt to the speed, he can reach volumes of up to Mach 3. And when the power behind a fully charged wind-up like that is enough to incapacitate a steel wall like Maki with all her heavenly restriction durability, I think the case is pretty shut and closed. Again, even if Yuji and Megumi are able to somehow not only survive Cursed Womb form and take advantage of Naoya's weaker exterior while he doesn't move with a point-blank Itadori Black Flash or something, not only was second stage Naoya able to survive a full power slash from the Soul Splitter and multiple punches from fully awakened Maki, this still isn't even the Vengeful Spirit's final form, which comes equipped with a domain expansion, Time Cell Moon Palace, which can enforce the 24 frames per second clause of projection sorcery on characters at the cellular level, which is just an instant win against Yuji, frankly. And if Megumi tug of wars, he definitely still can't hang in an actual physical fight with Cursed Naoya. And we all know how that ends up. With Cursed Naoya's speed, I frankly think it's obvious he disposed of Megumi before the man even made the correct hand signs and got the sentence out. But just to cover every possible outcome for this fight, if Divine General Maharaga was to be summoned and went up against Vengeful Spirit Naoya, that would indeed be a much closer matchup at least, because even Cursed Naoya has multiple different options at his disposal to eliminate Maharaga, which multiple different options is exactly what you need. I don't think his second stage projection sorcery or his attack power combined with Mach 3 speed is enough to actually delete Maharaga from existence, especially if Maki, when hit with pretty much the full force of Cursed Naoya's Mach 3 ram, was still breathing after the fact. Maharaga will definitely adapt to Naoya's speed and concoct a way to respond with devastating attacks that are much more stronger than Naoya can endure, and although domain expansion is going to be the best way to dispatch Maharaga, the result of that interaction comes down to if Naoya plays with his food or not. If he chooses to leave Maharaga a mess of flesh and cells from the very beginning, instead of slowly letting him unravel from his own motions like he does Daido and Mayo, Naoya could come out on top, because no matter what argument you make in regards to Maharaga or Cursed Naoya's stats, one cannot deny Time Cell Moon Palace is a truly exceptional and hard to beat sure hit domain. Much like Mahito's self-embodiment of perfection, unless you have anti-domain measures, the moment you get caught out in this domain, you've lost. Again, I'm willing to be swayed on this result, so leave a comment down below if you think Naoya would play the game correctly, or if Mahoraga would just adapt and conquer. But either way, guys, thank you so much for making it this far into the video. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and if you enjoyed the Culling Game Reverse series, go check out the plenty of other videos in it if you haven't seen them. Make sure you subscribe, check out an end screen video to continue your binge, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.